Alright, today in the shop we have a Briggs and Stratton, it's a Vanguard motor, 6.5 horsepower, and we are going to remove the ignition coil. So before we get started, this is basically a junk one that I have apart so you can see exactly where your ignition coil is located. Alright, here's your ignition coil here, which is resting on the flywheel, you can see, with the two bolts holding it on. And you'll have a wire on the bottom of it that actually unplugs. And the wire that goes to the spark plug does run out behind this little groove in your carburetor plate back here. So this carburetor is going to have to come off so that you can fish this back through when we get the ignition coil out. Now over here we have the actual one with the problem, and I'm going to show you how to get to that ignition coil. If you look closely on your shroud here, you're going to have a hex head, plus you can also put a socket on there. It's an 8mm. You're going to have one there, come over here, you have one there. And if you look up under the gas tank, straight back there, let me try to zoom in, you're going to have another. So you're going to need definitely going to need an extension to get into that one. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove those first. Alright, now that those are removed, to remove this, now be careful, because if you look up here, you can see you have a lot of linkage running across here, so you don't want to just yank this out and destroy or bend to break that linkage. So what you want to do is actually pull on it a little bit, and you want to tilt this on an angle. Tilt it on an angle to get it, because there is a top tab up there you want to get underneath of that linkage in order to pull this out of there, like that. See that top tab there with the bolt? That would have been hitting your linkage, so you need to angle it. You need to angle it like that to pull it out under the linkage. Now I want to take note, and this is where you should also, if you've never done these before, okay, this has to be set a certain way. So you're going to need one of these little Shim Kits here. All right, it has all the different sizes in them. I'm going to take the smallest size in this set, and I just want to show you now, you can actually slide that in. There's a little bit of friction, but not much. So when you're putting that back on, you want to make sure that you have that little bit of play underneath that coil. You definitely don't want it too tight, or you're going to destroy it. See how I can just barely slide that around in there? That's what you want. Alright, so putting it back on, make sure that you, I mean, you could use a business card or a really, really thin credit card or whatever too. But that's definitely going to come into play later on. Now, we're going to take these off. The ignition coil, it's 2 bolts. You're going to need a 9/32 socket. I'm going to go ahead and remove that now. Okay, I got our 2 bolts out of there. Now, on the bottom of the ignition coil, you're going to have a wire that's plugged in. You want to pull down on it, like that. And you just want to disconnect that wire there. All right, now, this is pretty much going to be suspended from the actual wire that goes to your spark plug. Now, that's going up, and we'll unplug our spark plug here. Now this, you're going to need to, and it may vary according to different models, but I'm going to need to take this air cleaner off and probably loosen up this carburetor, because our wire does run behind the carburetor up and into the spark plug. So to take this air filter off, we're going to have 2 nuts right here on each side. So we'll go ahead and take those off next. And these are going to be a 10mm. Alright, those 2 are out. Now you want to come up here, and you're going to have another 10mm right here. Alright, now if that one's removed, you should be able to slide this out. Now, there is going to be a carburetor gasket that may fall down on the ground here, but you should be able to slide this off. Come on, like that. Alright, and there's our gasket here. So, if it's not dangling there, look on the ground, because it probably fell down. Now that that's out of the way, you can see they had this rigged up. There's a zip tie holding this spark plug wire on there, and you can see the wire's fed up through there. That's not actually done right. Somebody did a coil on this before. That actually is supposed to run. Let me go around the machine, I'll show you. I'll show you on this one we have a part here already. It's a lot easier to get the camera here. Now, if you look behind your carburetor, let me move this light. There's a here's your carburetor plate here. Okay, this big plastic plate. And see that groove? that's where that ignition coil wire is supposed to run out of and up. Over here, I don't know why they had it running to the top, but this is the wrong way, okay? So what we need to do is we need to get this carburetor to pull forward so that we're able to get behind that plate there and put our wire in correctly. So the next thing you're gonna do is get a 5/32 socket, and you're gonna put it right on the end of this carburetor stud here. There we go. And you're gonna loosen these up. We're gonna try not to take the whole carburetor off, just to get enough of a gap back there. There we go, they're loose. I'm gonna back these out a little bit. These nuts are on here because when I took the air filter off, I just put these nuts back on so I didn't lose them. Try to turn these studs out by hand. And it'll start giving, see, it gives you a little play in the carburetor. But we're probably gonna need to take these studs all the way out. Alright, I got these studs backed all the way out. Now you'll be able to pull on your carburetor here. And let me try to come around the other side of this motor here. Alright, I can pull on this now. And here's our... I need some light in here. I'm in real tight quarters here. Alright, here is our plate. Right there. Alright, now that our carburetor is loose, we can feed our wire behind there. And the plate fell out. This is what it looks like, okay? So when it's mounted to the carburetor, your wire is coming behind this and through that groove. Alright, and that's how you're going to have to feed it. This may fall out on you once you remove these carburetor studs here. Alright, so what we're going to do first is, actually this is a used coil, but we know it's good. It came off of that junk motor over there. The next step would be, I would go ahead and make sure that, you know, the piece where you disconnected your wire at the bottom of the coil, make sure that that's at the bottom. But let's go ahead and feed our coil back up in here, and we're going to hand tighten those bolts, because remember earlier I showed you we're going to have to get that little metal shim in there and make sure we have the right separation between the coil and the flywheel. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and hand tighten those bolts in there. Alright, so I got my 2 bolts hand tight only in there, and I stuck my shim up underneath of each of them, as you can see. Okay, so we want to be able to push down on this a little bit. Alright, and just make sure we have that little bit of play there. Alright, and again, I'm using the smallest shim that comes on these sets. So you don't want to have too much of a gap, because that's going to interfere with your spark, and you definitely don't want it too tight. Alright, so right there, we're pretty much good. Now I'm going to have to stop the camera and tighten these, because you want to keep a little bit of pressure on this as you're tightening them. Because if you don't, when you go to tighten that, this is just going to come out of whack. Okay, so definitely keep one hand on it, not pushing real hard. Just making sure there's a little bit of pressure still on this shim. You can see it came out there. And tighten them up. And then you should still be able to slide this shim out of there after you tighten them up. And this might be a little difficult to see, but I'm keeping a little bit of pressure on the ignition coil. And I'm going to tighten it down. Don't go crazy, really moving this really fast. Just go nice, get it nice and snug. We don't want the coil to shift at all and mess up our spacing here. Alright, they're pretty tight there. And I still have movement in my shim here. Now I can pull that out. Okay, and I can proceed to go ahead and just crank down on these a little bit tighter, but be careful because these will snap inside of the block. Alright, it's nice and tight, and I'm able to put this under there with a little bit of friction again. Alright, and let's do the other side. Okay, so that's good. It's nice and tight. Now is where we're going to run our wire. Actually, we can reconnect our bottom wire. Turn some light on here. We can reconnect our bottom wire up there. There we go. And now we'll finish running this wire behind the carburetor. Alright, so we have our wire coming behind our carburetor plate here. And you want to slide your carburetor plate up, back up there. Okay, so that your wire is right there in that groove. All right, and then you're going to proceed to line up your carburetor and those stud bolts while you're holding this in place, and go ahead and screw those stud bolts back in there. Just keep your hand on the bottom of that carburetor plate back here, and you're going to need to be able to look down behind the carburetor and just make sure that that plate doesn't come out of alignment. Thread them in. Okay, they're nice and tight. Our plate is lined up. Our coil wire is coming out of the groove. Now we can take our socket and go ahead and tighten these, drive these studs all the way in. All right, our studs are all the way back in. Our gasket is still there. You can take your ignition coil wire now and put it back on the spark plug, like so. And now we can go ahead and I would say at this point, let's put the shroud back on, because that can get, you know, it's easier to see with this air filter assembly off. So we're going to go ahead and put the shroud back on first. All right, now be careful putting this shroud back on. Remember, when we took it off, we had to angle it to get it under all these little springs and linkage under here. If you don't angle it, putting it back in, you're gonna push one of these springs off, or you're gonna bend something, and you're actually gonna bolt this on with one of them being compressed against your shroud. So pay attention to everything up here as you're putting this back in, and make sure you don't have anything caught in the shroud. All right, so I got this up there. I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna put those bolts back in. All right, we're gonna go ahead and slide our air filter on now. I forgot to mention this earlier when we took the air filter off. Your little breather hose here that actually mounts onto the back of your air filter assembly here. So definitely make sure that you remember to hook that back up too. All right, everything is tight, and we move this to the on position. Put my foot on here to secure this thing. And that's how you take out an ignition coil and put it back in. Hopefully this helped. Please guys, hit subscribe below. Give me a like, and I'll see you next time.